Sometimes figures that in themselves are condemned by their society as heretics can nonetheless have major impact on the intellectual and religious development of that culture. We saw this in the European Christian world with Marguerite Porete and the Mirror of Simple Souls, for example, which continued to be a very popular book for a lot of history, but people didn't realize that it was by this woman who had been executed as a heretic for that book. In the Islamic world, the occult tradition of Lettrism, or the science of letters, ilm al-huruf, has been a pretty common and popular practice and idea. But although it has been represented by many different figures, many of them widely accepted as mainstream orthodox thinkers, there is perhaps no name more associated with the word Lettrism, or Hurufi, than the 14th-century Persian Islamic mystic Fazlallah Astarabadi. He taught deeply esoteric mystical ideas about the universe, our place in it, religion, and the powers of the Arabic and Persian alphabets. He even seems to have claimed to be the Messiah and started a movement that was very controversial, but still had an influence on the intellectual environment of, the Ottoman Empire and Central Asia. And this movement also produced some of the most celebrated and famous poets in history. So today we're going to spend some time and get to know the fascinating mystic Fazlallah Astarabadi and the movement that he started, who became known as the Hurufis. Fazlallah was born, as his name suggests, in the city of Astarabad, which is today Gorgan in northern Iran. He seems to have studied the regular Islamic sciences, he memorized the Quran, and quite early in his life became involved with Sufism, or Tasawwuf, as we can see from many of his later ideas that he was clearly influenced by the metaphysical and cosmological ideas of people like Ibn Arabi. But Fazlallah would soon become famous for a particular talent that he had. He had an uncanny ability to interpret dreams. This began as he was traveling around Central Asia, going on Hajj and visiting cities like Tabriz, Isfahan, and Khwarazm. In this period, he had several strange dreams that later appeared to have predicted the future. He later had dreams of Jesus, Solomon, and the Shi'i Imam Ali ar-Ridda, who gave him significant messages. He was clearly getting messages in different ways through his dreams, and his fame quickly started to spread around the region. Fazlallah was a quite devoted Sufi and an ascetic who often shunned the company of other people and was thought to have miraculous spiritual powers. And as he came to major cities like Isfahan, many people started seeking him out, some looking to him as a mystical teacher that could become their master, others basically only wanted him to interpret their dreams. And that he did. There are many stories of how Fazlallah would interpret dreams of people that came to him and told him about their dreams. He would interpret them, and also he could sort of find out secret things about their life from these dreams that no one else knew about. So there are these stories, someone would tell him about his dream, and he would say, "This is because you've been cheating on your wife with this and that person," and that would be correct, for example, right? So he could see into the hidden aspects of their lives and find out secrets about people just through interpreting their dreams and what those dreams signified. Where did he get this ability from? Well, in Khwarazm, he had a very significant dream that would cement him as the most important dream interpreter of his day, and perhaps even since the time of the Prophet Joseph. In this dream, Fazlallah met the Prophet Muhammad under a tree. The scholar Shahzad Bashir tells it like this, quote, Muhammad turned to Fazlallah and said that the gift of true dream interpretation is like a rare star that becomes visible every 30,000 years and encompasses 70,000 worlds. He then told Fazlallah that this star had now appeared and he could see it if he wished. He was told to go and stand under an orange tree where he would see 7 stars, one of them being bigger and more luminous than the others. He did so, and the luminous star emitted a ray of light that entered his right eye, conveying a special intuitive knowledge to him. He said that the ray of light felt like a pearly substance, which disclosed to him secret meanings of Muhammad's sayings, the hadith. In one report about the dream, he said that the light kept flowing until the whole star had poured into his eye. When he woke up from this dream, he felt that he could intuitively interpret all dreams and could also understand the language of birds. This is quite powerful, and it is only really a precursor to even greater things. Because indeed, Fazlallah's reputation and personal claims would only escalate from here. He had managed to gather quite a following, students who saw him as a great spiritual teacher and visionary. He also gradually started becoming more socially and even politically active. He married and had children and made more public claims of his intentions. He was seen as a spiritual master who had special access to the world of the ghaib, the hidden or unseen world, from which he could draw his interpretations and insights. And he had started teaching a unique form of mystical philosophy that put a heavy emphasis on the power and significance of language, on words and letters. For this reason, the relatively small but growing group of devoted followers became known as the Hurufis, which can be translated to something like the Lettrists. And we'll return to these ideas and teachings soon, because things were to turn very dramatic in the life of Fazlallah and his followers. In 1374, in the city of Tabriz, when he was in a 40-day spiritual retreat, referred to in Sufism as a khalwa, Fazlallah received a kind of illumination or revelation that confirmed his status as a very important figure in religious history. He was not just a particularly gifted dream interpreter and mystic. Now it became clear to him that he was much more significant than that. In fact, Fazlallah now believed that he was essentially the Messiah, or the Mahdi, whose life and teachings hinted at the coming apocalypse. Indeed, it seems that Fazlallah essentially saw himself as being even higher in rank than the prophets and all of the saints. One of his closest companions describes this revelation and its implications. Quote, "During a 40-day retreat in Tabriz, His Eminence, that is Fazlallah, was favored with a special revelation. At this time, spiritual secrets and truths and the stations of Muhammad came within the field of vision of his pure-seeing heart. He now went beyond the standing rank of others. After the event, he was completely beside himself for 3 nights and days and wept and lamented uncontrollably. On the 3rd day of this condition, a voice suddenly recited the following verses in his ear. In the moment he was rent asunder from earthly concerns. The world was freed from all calamities. If someone asks, 'Who is this young man? Who is this moon, earth, and heaven?' It is said, 'He is the master of the age and the sultan of all the prophets.'" This is quite the radical change, of course. While Fazlallah always considered himself to be a Muslim, these claims to be basically on a station higher than the prophets, that was a very radical claim and kind of clashes with some basics of mainstream orthodox Islamic ideas, right? So what he was saying here was very radical in this particular culture. And after he made these claims public in 1387, things started happening very rapidly. In some of his writings, such as in the Book of Sleep, Fazlallah seems to pretty clearly indicate that he had political ambitions as well. His role as the Messiah included gaining political power, and some of the dreams he describes also seem to point to the idea that this would be done through some kind of military means. As you can imagine, none of this went down very well with the political or religious establishment. This was a context that was quite chaotic to begin with. The region was ripe with apocalyptic sentiment. Timur or Tamerlane had just conquered most of Iran and beyond, and with an iron fist he was trying to stamp out any danger that was lurking in the society that he was now ruling. A popular mystic with a growing following that taught apocalyptic ideas and claimed to be the Messiah that would take over politically was not a very good look. So in 1394, when he was visiting a friend in Shirvan, Fazlallah was suddenly arrested and thrown in prison. While the reasons behind it were probably primarily political, Timur, or rather actually his son Miran Shah, looked to the religious establishment, the ulama, to get them to condemn Fazlallah's ideas as heretical in order to make the process faster. And what was that process? Well, indeed, very shortly after his arrest in the year 1394, Fazlallah was executed through beheading. His body was sent to his community and family, who were allowed to bury him, but this was of course a very shocking turn of events. This was supposed to be the Messiah, but here he was lying dead before them. So, like in basically every other such event in history, such as in the case of Jesus, for example, the community was now forced to rethink their ideas and reframe the death of their leader as part of a wider plan in some way. The movement, the Hurufis, thus continued to exist for a while after his death, being led by his family members, including his daughter actually, and a few of his most prominent disciples. But what were all these ideas that he was so famous for? Putting aside his claims of being the Messiah, even though his ideas are intimately connected with those claims, of course, but putting that aside to some degree, Fazlallah presents very interesting and fascinating esoteric and mystical ideas that are often connected with various different kinds of, or strands of esoteric Islam, like it's clear that he was a Sufi, that he belonged to Sufism, and a lot of these ideas, we see parallels in many other Sufi thinkers, for example, but also certain strands of Shi'i Islam and the esoteric sides of Shi'ism, for example. There's a lot of fascinating stuff in the thought of Fazlallah and the Hurufis. Just as we've explored in other videos about occult sciences and mystical teachings, Fazlallah had a view of reality that was essentially made up of various correspondences. All of reality contains messages and signs that point us toward God and the esoteric truths. The macrocosm of the entire universe is mirrored in the microcosm of the human being, the latter of whom plays a very important role. Just like thinkers like Ibn Arabi and the Akbari school, Fazlallah sees the world as a place of manifestation or signs of the divine names and attributes. It was created because of the tension or loving wish that is mentioned in the famous Hadith Qudsi that, quote, "I was a hidden treasure and I loved to be known, so I created the world that I might be known." This wish for the hidden treasure to be known was relieved through the command be, or kun in Arabic, which existentiated the cosmos. And this is also read pretty literally in a sense, at least according to Fazlallah. God literally speaks the world into existence, and thus all of reality is made up of language, a kind of meta-language of words and letters that are the building blocks of reality. When God then creates the human being through Adam, the Quran then says that Adam was, quote, taught all the names. Now what this means to Fazlallah is that Adam, or the human being, was taught the 32 letters of this meta-language of reality, thus enabling him to understand the world around him to a more profound degree than other creatures. To know the name of a thing is to know that thing's very nature or essence. Fazlallah himself liked to say, quote, "The metalinguistic name of a thing is its very essence." This is clearly an example of the wider discipline that is often called ilm al-huruf, or the science of letters, that have become quite popular, and particularly in the Jewish and Islamic world at this time. It had been pioneered in the 13th century by figures like Ibn Arabi and Ahmed al-Buni, and was perhaps primarily associated with these two figures up until that point. But after Fazlallah, at least in the Eastern Islamic world, his name was to become basically synonymous with this ilm al-huruf. But this meta-language of reality that he talks about isn't the same as our human language. Our language and writing systems are only reflections of this more universal language, particular concrete forms or manifestations of something that is much more abstract. But some human languages and scripts are better than others, so to say, and Fazlallah considers Arabic and Persian to be the two most exalted languages. Particularly Persian, in fact, which is shown by the fact that the Persian alphabet contains 32 letters, so the same amount of letters of the meta-language, whereas Arabic only has 28. Furthermore, Fazlallah basically only wrote in Persian, and sometimes in his native Astarabadi dialect too. And this is significant because it says something about his identity as a Persian or Iranian, and that this was a central theme for his view of himself and the world. The Persian language was the most exalted and important language because it was closest to this meta-language of reality. Some have even chosen to see him as a sort of pre-modern nationalist Iranian who sort of rejects Islam and highlights this Persian or Iranian pre-Islamic identity. And this is stretching things a bit. It's clear that Fazlallah always saw himself as a Muslim, but it's no doubt that he emphasizes this Persian or Iranian, perhaps, identity as very important and exalts the Persian language and the Persian culture in many different ways. So this is a very important aspect of what he's doing, and there's no way that we could sort of deny that. That is a part and parcel of the sort of the message that he's trying to convey here. Needless to say, the letters of the worldly alphabet, especially Arabic and Persian, have powers in themselves that can be employed in different ways, and Fazlallah's followers, as we know, came to be known as the Hurufis, or Lettrists, and particularly for this reason. The physical letters and language are signifiers, deeply connected to their metalinguistic equivalents. And if one knows the metalinguistic language, one can know all things in the world, since all things are built on this language. And the best way to understand this meta-language was through the human languages, particularly again Persian and Arabic, and by the aforementioned methodology of Ilm al-Huruf. Quote, "The only way to get to the meta-language from ordinary languages was to break words down into letters and sounds and analyze them to see their metalinguistic reference. Each letter and its sound had significant secrets and meanings that could be gleaned. And this also allowed Fazlallah and his followers to read and interpret the Quran in some really interesting, unique, and esoteric ways by focusing particularly on the letters and the words themselves. And because Persian as a language transcends Arabic and is, so to say, closer to the meta-language, they would sometimes read the Quran, and when they saw words or phrases in Arabic, because the Quran is written in Arabic, of course, or revealed in Arabic, but sometimes those phrases or words could also be read in Persian, but in Persian would mean something completely different. That Persian meaning was seen as legitimate, according to these interpretations. This is a very interesting esoteric way of reading the Quran, where even though the Quran is written in Arabic, because Persian transcends Arabic, that means we can sort of read the Quran in Persian sometimes. And those would be even deeper and more profound meanings of the verses of the scripture. As another example, the letters of the name Allah, Alif, Lam, Ha, have significant meanings just based on their shape. The Alif is straight, the Lam is bent, and the Ha is rounded. This also corresponds to the different positions that the worshipper takes during the daily Islamic prayers. Standing straight, which is the Alif, bowing, which is the Lam, and then prostration, which is the Ha. Whatever the case, because Adam was taught all the names or letters of this meta-language, among other things, the human being has an exalted place in creation. She is the microcosm that reflects the macrocosm, and the place of revelation. Just as the cosmos and the Quran are revelations, so too the human being is also a kind of revelation from God. And we can find clues to these correspondences in the constitution of the human being. Every human, according to this philosophy, has 7 lines of hair on their face. The hairline, 2 eyebrows, and 2 sets of eyelashes, which counts as 4 lines. This number, 7, corresponds to the number of verses in the Fatiha, the opening chapter of the Quran. When men become older, they receive more hair on their face in the form of beards, making the lines on their face a total of 14, which corresponds to the 14 letters that can be found at the beginning of some surahs. If one doubles that number, counting the lines themselves and the places or seals where they sit, that becomes 28, which is the number of letters in the Arabic alphabet, which of course the Quran was revealed in. Furthermore, humans are also expected to part their hair or beards into 2, thus revealing another line, a total of 8 lines on each face. And if you multiply 8 with the 4 elements of nature, so 8 times 4, you get 32, the number of letters in the meta-language that builds reality. So you can see here some examples of the way that he portrays these correspondences and connections between the world at large, the cosmos, the microcosm of the human being, and the Quran in really interesting ways. And this is some really good and juicy esotericism at play. And speaking of these correspondences, just like the human being is born and then eventually decays and dies, so of course the cosmos itself will eventually also decay and be destroyed. And this is important for Fazlallah because he believes that the apocalypse, the end of the world, is very imminently, it's coming very soon. In fact, Fazlallah divides cosmic history into 3 phases. The cycle of prophethood, which began with Adam and ended with Muhammad. The cycle of sainthood, beginning with Ali and ending with Fazlallah himself. And then the cycle of divinity, which began with Fazlallah's revelation and would end in an impending apocalypse. As we saw, Fazlallah saw himself as the person whose life and teachings inaugurated this apocalyptic event in some way. He was a messianic figure that was to guide the true believers to salvation through his esoteric teachings, and the fact that his person and body had become a kind of repository or place of manifestation for the metalinguistic letters and the divine realities. But as we know, Fazlallah was executed in 1394, and that seems to complicate things a bit, right? So what did the community do with this information? If he was supposed to inaugurate the apocalypse and he was this messiah, why did he die, right? What does this mean? And so, like I said, just like in many other similar movements in history, like with Jesus, for example, this really forced the community to rethink some of the ideas and implications of what Fazlallah taught. And there seems to have been kind of a split in the community. So the community was kept alive by his close followers, by his family members who sort of inherited this community. But there seems to have been certain splits and differences of opinion regarding some implications and teachings. Some believe that the apocalypse was still coming in the very imminent future, and that Fazlallah was sort of raised from the grave. He would return and sort of lead the community through this event. Others seems to have interpreted it more esoterically, that the apocalypse had already happened, but that this apocalypse was not a sort of physical end of the world, but a more esoteric apocalypse in a certain sense. But regardless of which position they took here, Fazlallah's shrine became a very important center for this community. And that became really the central point of the community and their religious lives. So it seems like the shrine of Fazlallah seems to have kind of replaced the Kaaba in Mecca as a place of, as a center of religious activity and as a sort of pilgrimage site. So the Hurufis would go to the shrine of Fazlallah instead of the Kaaba. But while the movement did continue for a while after his death, after like a century or so, it had basically started disappearing as a coherent community as such. But some of the teachings of Fazlallah continued to be popular and spread in different parts of the Islamic world. Some of his close followers became famous figures and writers themselves. And undoubtedly the most famous of them all is Imad ad-Din Nesimî, one of the most celebrated poets in Turkic and Persian history. Indeed, Nesimî is probably a lot more famous than his master Fazlallah ever was, by way of his very popular mystical poetry. He wrote diwans or poetry collections in both Turkic, specifically an earlier form of the Azerbaijani language, as well as in Persian. And when we read the poems of Nesimî, we find a quite radical and intoxicated Sufi mystic, whose bold expressions often remind us of earlier poets like Hallaj. He tells us of the mystical path and the goal of experiencing union with God. Quotes, "I have plunged into the sea which has no bourne. I have become submerged in this treasure which has no loss. I have found this full moon which has no waning. I have entered that city which has no devastation." But just like Hallaj and many other Sufi writings, he very plainly expresses the metaphysical idea that God is everywhere, and that there is only God and nothing else. Quote, "Oh, the world is filled with thee, the world is from thee. Thou art both the eye of the world and likewise its body and soul. From the letter of thy brows was body and soul, from thee came whatever was made manifest." And he even goes as far as indicating his own identity with this absolute reality, or really the non-existence of his own self in the face of the true reality in the experience of union. Quote, "Absolute being am I, with absoluteness I have declared. The truth is witness, the truth knows that the truth I have declared. The secret of I was a hidden treasure, in mystic manner I have declared. I pointed my finger, the moon cleft I have declared." But we also find, of course, some direct references to his identity and creed as a Hurufi in these poems, even though they can be somewhat veiled sometimes. For example, he says, quote, "I saw that moon and celebrated the festival. That lip I used as wine, those eyes as cup. I went on the pilgrimage. I resolved upon the pilgrim's garb. Fa and Zad and Lam, I made the name of the truth." This poem contains a reference to Fazlallah in the last verse, which spells out the letter Fa, Dad, and Lam, Fadl as in Fazlallah, and even hints at the very high status in which his followers considered him, saying he is the, quote, "name of truth." or references to key Hurufi ideas such as the importance of certain numbers like 7, 18, and 32, as well as the importance of the human being in reality and the face of the human being being a kind of a place or sign that manifests God's word. Quote, "O thou whose comeliness is the manifestation of the essence of the Ancient of Days, thy countenance is Allah and the merciful and the compassionate." And even what appears to be references to the messianic claim and character of Fazlallah and the impending apocalypse that he is a sign of. Quote, "The sun rose from the west, the Messiah descended. See the Messiah, or are you evil? Renounce talking in illusions, for the enigma became clear, the trumpet sounded, and the resurrection came true." As is sometimes the case, Nesimî's quite radical poetry became controversial. And eventually, for this reason, but probably mostly for political reasons again, he would suffer the same fate as his master Fazlallah, as well as his poetic hero Hallaj. Because indeed, sometime around 1419 in Aleppo, he was very gruesomely flayed alive and then executed. But as is often the case with figures that are martyred in this way, this probably only made his fame even greater after his death, and he has remained one of the most popular and celebrated mystical poets in the Turkic and Persian languages, thus continuing to spread not only the love mysticism of his brand of Sufism, but also the unique teachings of Fazlallah and the Hurufis. So while Fazlallah Astarabadi is not maybe that famous of a name worldwide, we can see here that in different ways, both directly and indirectly, his ideas and influence can be seen in various places across the Islamic world. Some of his ideas became quite prominent in the Ottoman Empire, especially with Sufi groups like the Bektashis. So the Bektashis seem to have incorporated a lot of the ideas, or a lot of ideas from Fazlallah. One story tells of how one of his closest students actually, after he died, traveled to Anatolia and spread his message there, and that the Bektashis were in contact with this follower of Fazlallah and thereby incorporated his teachings, for example. And, his general formulations about the ilm al-huruf, the science of letters, has become very influential and popular in occult circles generally, both in the Islamic world and also to some degree outside. But I think his influence is fairly limited outside the Islamic world, but still, just this general discipline of the science of letters, which was popular in his day and was practiced by different kinds of people. But the Hurufis, because of this name, as the name sort of suggests, became very strongly associated with this practice in general. And so in that sense, he has also had an influence by sort of being the name associated most strongly with Lettrism, at least in the Eastern Islamic world. For this reason, it serves as well to know about this very famous and fascinating figure. Thank you so much for watching. I would like, as always, to give a special shout out to my patrons. It's easy to make that mistake. To my patrons over on Patreon who support this channel monetarily. None of this would be possible without you. And this really is a community-driven channel and podcast in most ways, right? I wouldn't be able to do this without the support of you guys, and all this content is free, right? But I am able to do this as a sort of full-time job, basically because of your support. So I am deeply indebted and grateful for all your support. If anyone else wants to support this channel in this way, you can do so through Patreon in a sort of monthly subscription, and I will leave links to that in the description. You can also simply leave a one-time donation through PayPal, and there will be links to that in the description too. And for those who aren't able to support in that way, you can just like the video, comment, and subscribe to the channel. That is really helpful. It helps the algorithm and all this stuff that we need to keep in mind when we do YouTube like this. So thank you so much. You can find me on my socials if you're interested in following my work, both on in terms of religious studies and my music. I'll leave that here. You can also follow my link tree in the description. Most of my links and stuff is there. You can also check out my other channel, Filip Holm, dedicated to my music, where I put up music and content about music and music history and theory. So if you're interested in that, then go subscribe to that channel too. Thank you so much again for watching, and I'll see you next time.